And I think with the movies, it's just a great backdrop for all of us to come together, relax. And sometimes it's easier to see those issues first in the characters. And then at night when we're going to sleep, we go, oh, I do that too, just like the main character. We have a little bit of insight that previously we were too defended. But once we see it in the movie acted out, then we're like a little more insightful after that movie.
Today, I'd like to welcome back to the show a dear friend of mine, David Hoffmeister. David, welcome back. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Chrissy. Christina. It's just always a joy to talk to you, and it's always very spontaneous. So we never know what's going to come out, but we always have fun.
Yes, yes. It's always fun to chat with you. And so this is our third interview, I believe.
Yes, I think so.
And we've talked about A Course in Miracles in general. And then we also talked about holy relationships as it's defined in the Course in Miracles. So today we're going to switch gears to something a little more fun, or the other stuff is just as fun too.
Yeah.
But today we're going to talk about movies and how we can actually heal and awaken by watching movies. So I'm really excited, David. I actually had no idea that this was something that you did or that you enjoyed until well after I started following you. And what stood out to me was before I did any work, before I had A Course in Miracles, in 2008, I had just gotten out of treatment. And I went to the movies with my one kid at the time, and we saw WALL-E. And as I was watching WALL-E, I was having this experience of, wow, like they're telling the future, or they're really tapping into something here. And ever since that moment, that's how I would view movies. And so I'm curious, how did this start for you? What inspired you?
Well, I mean, I think I've always enjoyed movies my whole life. And I think it probably was more just the entertainment value, just the same with music. I think it had a huge entertainment value and kind of carried me through a lot of dark years of kind of wandering or feeling lost or disoriented or not knowing what would happen. And then the movies and the music were kind of lifting my spirits, carrying me through. And then at some point, it seemed like with the music and the movies, I started to get a feeling like there was a very deep meaning or message or purpose for the music and for the movies that I was not previously aware of. And then I would have some songs that would just really lift me up, and I would string them together back in the days of cassette tapes and then on DVDs at the next, through the whole thing. And I would put together sequences of them, and it would turn into almost like music meditations. And then I started going to movies and feeling deep spiritual stirrings happening. I think back, for example, with the movie Gandhi. It's a very long movie, but I know I had tears a lot through the movie because I was like kind of getting a window into a purpose that was very, very deep and touched my heart so deeply and kind of called to me. And I remember the very last end of the movie when they sprinkling Gandhi's ashes over the water and the sun is reflecting, and it's like there have been tyrants and over the ages, but in the end, truth always prevails. And then it ends with, think of it, always after like truth prevails. And I just felt such a warm feeling after that long movie. And then I think the more I got into A Course in Miracles, I started getting inner promptings like Jesus was teaching me in my mind while the movies were going on. He was mentioning things and notice this and look at that, and this is what it's showing you. And so I started to get like this internal interpretation of the movies, like these are parables. And Jesus said, I use parables a lot because people had to have something they could relate to.
Yeah.
When he would say the kingdom of heaven is at hand, people would look, what's he talking about? It doesn't seem to be equating with planet Earth and the experience on the timeline. But then his parables really helped, that you could marinate with them and you could let them sink in and resonate with them. And I think the same with the movies. So of course, I remember with the Truman Show, I was so blown away that I actually was in the movie theater, and I came out from that movie and I was so euphoric. I felt just one with everything and with everyone. And I walked out of the theater and I just stood out by the popcorn stands in the lobby and just watched the people coming out. And I just felt like I knew every one of them. I felt like I was completely connected with everyone in the movie theater. And I thought, this is really wonderful. But the movie just lifted me up, almost like showing that it's all a game. It's on a loop, and the characters are coming and going. But once you detach from being too identified with the roles, then you can observe it in a whole new way, a new perspective. So I went out to my car and I went to my grandmother, and she was probably at that time, maybe, I don't know, in her 80s, late 80s or something, or early 90s. And I was so happy that when I got to her apartment, I was like dancing around in the apartment like Fred Astaire. And she was like, what is up with you? And I said, I don't know. I just saw this movie and I feel euphoric. And she said, well, don't get too fanatic. And I said, I don't even know what it is. It's hard to get fanatic on it, but it just feels so good. So with the Truman Show, and then there was another movie, Dark City. I was traveling, teaching the course, and I was up in, I think, Detroit, Michigan area. And I was doing a gathering with a group of students, maybe 20. And one of them said, oh my gosh, you have to see this movie, Dark City. It's just the Course in Miracles in a major motion picture. And I thought, I can't even imagine what that would be. But it had the whole thing of attack thoughts and a world of darkness. And at the end, the main character has to change his mind about everything, and it turns the whole world from upside down to right side up, back toward the light. And then the whole world turns into this thing called Shell Beach, which was kind of symbolic of the real world, all lit up and all happy. And him and the two main character and his wife like meet each other for the first time, like they don't know each other, and it's so innocent. Yeah. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And then I started, of course, continued my travel, but wherever I went, everybody wanted a movie gathering along with sessions. So I remember I would hold like 6-week retreats over in Spain on the island of Mallorca. And I would pretty much show a movie after dinner every night. And I would just have dinner and pray, what is the movie you want me to show? And then the teachings would just come spontaneously with the movie. And then people's questions afterwards would take us into different themes that their emotions were up. They were up where they could look at them and release them. So that's kind of how it got started. And it continues to this day.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing the journey. There's so much that I want to talk about in what you all just said. So we'll see what we get to and what we don't. Okay. So the first thing that I just want to comment on is how you mentioned this a couple of times in your journey about when you were standing outside of the theater and you were watching these people come out, how you felt like you knew them. And then how everyone was asking you after your teachings to, do a movie night. And the first thing that I love about movies and what they bring to us is they do kind of join us together. I mean, every Friday night, my kids and I are, trying to figure out what movie are we going to watch tonight, so
Yeah.
it brings some joining
Yes.
and it brings some connection. And I just think that that is probably one of the foundations of why movies are so magical. But the other thing you mentioned was Jesus. And I have so many questions around this because you mentioned that the teachings kind of just come spontaneously. And what I got was that Jesus is giving you or the Holy Spirit's giving you the interpretation that we need. And also, there's a lot of movies and shows about Jesus, like The Chosen.
Yes.
So I'm curious, because I love talking about Jesus. That's like the center of every conversation that I love to have, which is why I love the course so much. I'm curious what your thoughts are. I just had this random thought come in that, maybe Jesus is channeling through these writers, through these producers, through these directors, and through these actors. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, what your perspective is on that.
Yeah. I think, of course, that's one of the common ways that we can get the wisdom from Jesus is through the movies. And The Chosen is more of a modern day depiction, I think, of quite a friendly, humorous, wise teacher who is shown interacting with the apostles and Mary Magdalene and a group of women and people coming at him, Pharisees and Sadducees from every side.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dallas Jenkins and Jonathan Rumi do a great job with Jenkins and his wife kind of being the inspiration behind the company that's doing it and taking a leap of faith with crowdfunding at the beginning and putting it out on an app. And now you're seeing it on Amazon, but
Right.
in the early days, a few years ago, they were just asking for money to do the next show or the next few shows, pay it forward kind of a thing. So that was another amazing, I've never seen a pay it forward thing that grew so big and so fast.
Yeah.
But for me, the Jesus movies go back because there are quite a few. I think a friend of mine was telling me, I don't know if he said how many there was hundreds of Jesus movies in film through the years. And I think probably the one that really got my attention wasn't the one that Mel Gibson did, The Passion of the Christ, but it was actually called Jesus of Nazareth, and it was a British actor, Robert Powell, who played Jesus with such presence. But it was I think it was like I don't know how many hours. It was a very long movie, but I have seen more edited versions that cut it down to like a couple hours. And I have used that one over the years quite a lot because it's got all the real famous teachings from the Bible in it, delivered with Robert Powell's presence and his bright blue eyes, and it's just stunning. And then what I'll do is I'll show it slowly, and then having studied the course for decades, and these interpretations come because Jesus quotes the Bible quite a lot, the King James Bible a lot in the Course in Miracles. And so for me, being raised Christian, going through Course in Miracles, and now using the Jesus movies, I would pause, and when he would talk about the kingdom of heaven is at hand and everything, I would pause it and go into the depth of what he teaches us in the Course, or around forgiveness, or the woman at the well, or the very famous scenes. I would pause it and do that. And then when The Chosen came out, it was so beautiful because in our community, people were like, wow, it was like a discovery. And we would get together like you do with your kids on Friday night. We would get together and they would play the episode with the little fishies moving in the front and the drums pounding. And then we all get into it. And then basically I would stay on with the community members that were online, and we would have a discussion because some things were triggered for people, or emotions were coming up, or themes that they wanted to go deeper into.
Yeah.
So I found that, yeah, the Jesus movies and The Chosen are fantastic, and to be able to watch them now and discover them on Amazon, it's kind of like you're like a little kid with a toy, like, oh my gosh, what have I got here?
Right, right. I love that. And okay, so I find it really fascinating. For me, it's like whenever I watch The Chosen, and I have 2 more episodes left of the 3rd season, but I can't wait for the 4th season to come out already. But every time I watch it, it doesn't matter what's going on that day for me or what's actually in my reality. I hear things that apply to what I might be having a question about or what I might be struggling with. And what I found so interesting is that I can't remember the actor's name who plays Jesus, but
I
there
think it's
is
Jonathan Rumi, maybe
John,
something like
yeah. So there is a series on Amazon Prime about his journey. And you mentioned that they were just looking for funding to do the next episode. Well, the actor himself who played Jesus was at like a rock bottom financial low place when they started
that.
filming.
Wow.
And so what I got as you were saying that with that knowledge and how you were talking about their crowdfunding, it's like, look at what's possible when we're following God's will. Because just my perspective, I cannot say one bad thing about The Chosen. Like it is so perfectly delivered.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in some sense, you know, you and I are like Jonathan Rumi in the sense that when I first started working with the course, I really had nothing going on in the world. But I know for you, you came from a corporate job and what people would say much more of a standard kind of lifestyle, working and everything, to just trusting with the podcast and trusting with everything. And then that's what I've enjoyed about our conversations. You would say, oh my gosh, it was unbelievable how everything showed up and the synergy, and it just started to roll. And that's a testimony right there. So I think, you've kind of done the same thing that the Chosen have done. Maybe that's one of the reasons you can't say a bad thing about it, because
Right.
it's just mirroring what's going on in your experiences too.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you pointed that out because, one of the things I love about movies is that it's so much easier. And this is in life too, in general. I can see my clients, I can see my friends, I can see everyone out there so clearly. But when it comes to seeing myself, I don't see it that clearly. And so I love the reflection, but I'm also like tapping into that's kind of the magic of movies. We can watch something, and because we're not taking it personally, we can actually extract so much more out of the experience we're experiencing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah,
Because it's
yeah,
easy to see the actor, and in The Chosen, Jesus talks about trusting, and he says, "Don't worry about your needs." And there's little bits of evidences along the way where they don't need to worry, where it's actually true what he's saying. But in my life, it is not so easy to trust.
The history of Christina.
It can be really a huge struggle, and I never can really apply it like exactly to myself. But when I hear it, I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, I am doing
Yeah,
that too,
yeah,
as you have throughout your whole journey with the
yeah, yeah. I
as
think too,
well.
it's something about movies, there's so many, and it kind of stretches our awareness and expands our awareness. I remember a movie I came uh, across a long time ago, and I think George Clooney was in it, and Steven Soderheim, I think, wrote the play or the screenplay, but it was called Solaris. And just the name of it, solar is light, and then light is. It's kind of Solaris is light is.
Mm.
It was such a deep movie, and it comes along at such a slow pace that with the commentary that I had coming from Jesus through it, it was mind-blowing. I mean, I've shown certain movies over the years in different countries where people have actually broken into like a full-blown mystical experience during the movie for the first time in their life. They have their first mystical experience with the movie and the depth of everything and the way it's just unfolding. They're just seeing it as if for the first time. And the commentary, it just, a lot of people have had mystical experiences. And with Solaris, it was so good because it kind of takes you very deep to facing the fear of love, the fear of the light. When most people think of fear in a human condition, we think of certain conditions and situations, relationships, heartbreaking experiences that are really tied to events and people. But this movie kind of takes you towards a planet called Solaris that seems to be a reflection that it's all mind. And so like they'll have lines in it like, strange thing, we've been observing Solaris, this distant planet, and it seems to know that we're observing it, and it's aware that it's being observed. You know, you don't hear that in movies most of the time, but the whole movie goes into this idea that people in our life are just shadows of the past, and when they go to Solaris, even when people are no longer in the astronaut's awareness or physical proximity, if they think of them, then they appear. And so it's like a celestial speed up of as you sow, so shall you reap. If there's any unresolved issues, we know how it comes around on this planet, but sometimes it can take, weeks, months, or years, or decades. But this happens very rapidly, and they have to face all their thoughts. And so for about a decade, I would tell people, well, if you're on a desert island and you only got a few hours to live and you get one request for a movie before you exit, pick Solaris, because you can actually go toward the light in such a rapid way. But without commentaries, some people's minds are really ready for that and they kind of feel something deep. Others are like, oh, it drags, it's slow and everything. But with the commentary, that usually spices it up and primes the mind for the deep realization. So that's the fun for me, is just showing up, and like we're doing this talk, we're just being spontaneous in the moment. It's not pre-planned.
Yeah, no, I love that spontaneity. And I'm making notes, Dark City and Solaris. I have not seen those yet. So those are going to be on my weekend. We'll see if I can get my kids to join me. They may
Dark
or may
City,
not. We'll see.
you really have to hang with it, because it's, it shows that the world's kind of a dark world, and it's pretty much until the final scenes when everything gets turned around. And sometimes, what are we watching, a Boris Karloff movie, or what is going on here? But it's like you got to hang with it.
Yeah. And what I love about how you were describing Solaris in the movie, what I was hearing and seeing was that in the space of making movies, we aren't as limited as we think we are in this normal realm. So one of the reasons that I do love watching movies with my kids is because I can add commentary to things that I'm trying to teach them, but because I'm their mom and they don't listen to me, they're going to pay attention to a movie instead. But I can't always illustrate what I'm thinking, what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling. I can't always articulate in words. And what I love about movies is that, and definitely going back to, the 80s and 90s when I was growing up to now, there's been so much evolution with it, but we have a sense that we're unlimited when we're creating movies. And so the truth that's coming in, it can just be expressed in so many different ways, which speaks to the kind of people who are going to watch it, right? Like there's people who love science fiction, there's people who love drama, and it's kind of all over the place. I'm curious what you have to say about that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like the movies are kind of tailor-made. That's why guidance is always the most important thing, I think, in intuition. But I like that you can go through a day, regardless of the clients you see or how the day goes, and then gather up with your children and kind of just feel into a movie together and then be shown. Sometimes drama movies are really good because they can bring up some fear into awareness that needs to be looked at. Comedies, romantic comedies, those are always big hits because there's a lot of laughter with them. And I think even when we start to get some insights, if we can do it while we're laughing, that's like a bonus. It's almost like having ice cream with whipped cream and hot fudge and cherry on the top. When you can get your insights through romantic comedies. And even movies like Groundhog Day, which is kind of the time loop, but there's still little love stories and romances inside. And then it kind of even explores how special relationships, when you try to get something from someone, how it blows up in your face. Except in Groundhog Day, it's repeatedly. So you get the lesson, like you don't have to live it out yourself.
Doesn't life feel like that though?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, it does.
like he's doing it in one day, but how long does it actually take us to really see like, oh, we have healthy relationships when we give, not take?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I know I've this thing called Movie Watcher's Guide to Enlightenment, but there's a lot of time loop movies going back to Groundhog Day and then another and another and another. But it does seem to give us more of a glimpse at what the lesson is because we can see the main character going through it in a rapid way.
Yeah.
And then we can go, okay, let's remember that. Let's hold on to that insight.
Yeah.
So I do feel like they're modern day parables, but they're very engaging. Some people like to read, some people don't. Some people like audiobooks better. I think with movies, it's the audio visuals, it's the soundtrack, it's just you swept away and it's so much so that the emotions come up very quickly. And I think that that's what Jesus was doing with me in my early years, in my teens and 20s. He was like telling me, you're repressed more than you know. You're in denial more than you know. He has a phrase that he uses, I think, in Absence from Felicity. He calls it complementary ego dynamics. So if you've got a guy who's totally repressed and denied, and then he gets paired up with a woman who's so in touch with her feelings that they're always right on the surface, that makes for rapid healing because she draws him more into the emotional honesty. And sometimes he can say, here, I'm a stable link for you. When you feel like you're so emotional, you're going to burst or lose it, there's a stability. So I like how Jesus uses terms like complementary ego dynamics, like only Jesus could get away with that. If a psychotherapist said that, they'd go, what school of thought is that? That didn't come from Freud or Jung or Carl Rogers, or Abraham Maslow. What is that? But when you go deeper into the metaphysics and teachings, you really see the wisdom of Jesus. Like he really, really is showering us with wisdom. And I think with the movies, it's just a great backdrop for all of us to come together, relax. And sometimes it's easier to see those issues first in the characters. And then at night when we're going to sleep, we go, oh, I do that too, just like the main character. We have a little bit of insight that previously we were too defended. But once we see it in the movie acted out, then we're like a little more insightful after that movie.
Yeah. When we see ourselves in those actors, we're like, oh. And then also, I know for me, it makes it a little easier to accept something about myself because if there was an entire production team, right? There's a writer who had to write the script. There's a director who had to decide how it wanted to go. There's producers. There's an entire team of people that are all co-signing that scene. It's like, I must not be the only one who experiences this.
Yes.
If the thought exists somewhere else, then okay, I can actually now have some space, which I think is the magic of movies for me, is that, it's like no thought is an original thought. and everything is manifested from a thought. So
Yeah.
somebody had to be inspired by this story, by this fantasy, this magic, whatever it is. They had to be inspired, and then they had to share it. And then they had to have other people agree to the same thought. And then it's produced into this beautiful experience, really. And I just think it's so amazing that, and I honestly believe that Jesus does work through us in this way. I mean, when you watch The Chosen, when you read the Course in Miracles, anything that you know about Jesus is that he uses parables. He
Yeah.
uses other people's examples of their life to help you see yourself. And that's exactly what's going on in
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
movies.
I think it's beautiful because then when we see it done and over and over and over, and we see how he does it with such ease, it does give us a spark of inspiration to say, that would be fun to be able to do that and be that helpful. And then I think that's been the thing for me, watching movies, showing movies, so many in so many gatherings for so many years, that it starts to get much more natural, and it starts to feel like Jesus says miracles are involuntary. They should not be under conscious control. You just find this swirl of love in your heart where you want to be truly helpful. And then you show up with a group of people and amazing things come through. And I think also for a lot of us, we get into self-development, and then we start to get into spirituality. And for us, we got into A Course in Miracles. Like there's a movie that's a little more recent called Lucy with Morgan Freeman and Scarlett Johansson, but it's such a rapid character development from the beginning of her just being this guy's girlfriend to getting involved with the Korean mafia and this blue crystal powdery stuff and into her bloodstream. And then she goes through all the stages and steps that Jesus talks about, that David Hawkins talks about, that all the great teachers and masters have talked about. But in one movie, she goes from being a frightened girlfriend to I am everywhere. That's absolutely amazing.
Mhm.
I had a friend of mine who in a theater, she had a full-blown mystical experience after that movie, and she could hardly walk. They had people on both sides of her to get her out of the movie theater because she kind of just was drunk on the Lord, so to speak, from watching that movie. So it just shows you when we're really willing, we can really be lifted up in consciousness and awareness toward God, toward the Christ, in a very kind of natural way. We don't even see it coming. Sometimes that's the best thing. We're ready, obviously, but we don't see it coming.
Yeah. I love too how the Course says, and I don't know if this is going to be verbatim, but I did just read it the other day, how it's not required for someone to understand or be aware that we're being extended love, or that's what we're feeling. And
Yeah.
so I feel like movies really create that for a lot of people who may not be on a spiritual path or aware of spirituality, or even doing any kind of spiritual practices. And the evidence of that would be we've been turning to music, to movies. I know for a long time, especially before I got sober, when I felt, and I was numb for a very long time, but when I felt extra numb, we'll say, which is a weird thing to say. How can you feel extra numb, right? But I do feel numbness very strong. I would look to, what do I want to feel? And I would pick my movie based on what I wanted to feel. And in that process, and I always test, like I always say that a good actor is, am I feeling them or not? Are they good actors? Because if they are, then I'm going to feel what they're feeling and I'm going to cry with them.
Yeah.
And I've always believed that you have to feel it to heal it. And so I feel that not only is there insight and, so much awareness that can come, but like you were just explaining about your friend, like we can actually heal by allowing the feelings to move through us and being in that experience, we can vicariously live it and heal it. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, well, you touched on the main point. I know from my experience, because I was numbed out, and I was really, I even look at my senior class picture. I was voted most quiet in my senior class in 1976, and I look at my face though, and I see kind of glossed over eyes, like, oh my God, 18 years old, I don't know what's coming next, and I'm totally numbed out. Uh, and and then I believe in spiritual awakening, that being in touch with emotions is a benefit. I know some people would say they're so sensitized to their emotions, and so their emotions are so close that they feel they're dysfunctional. And many times people do turn to drugs and alcohol because they feel like they can't handle it. It's like a bundle of emotions that are like a fire hose coming out. It's way too strong. But I always tell people, no, I think that's the biggest blessing. I think that you're way ahead of the game in spiritual awakening if you're in touch with your emotions. So, the strong, silent type, the John Wayne and all this and this, yeah, maybe it looks sexy to the ego, but emotionally and spiritually, that is not going to get you anywhere. So I think for myself, I had to first start to admit I needed a lot of help. I needed like really a huge amount of help. And then the course and getting in a relationship, my first romantic relationship, and the music and the movies, that was like all a quad, perfect conditions to blast the emotions open. And I did feel dysfunctional, and I did feel out of control, and I did feel, oh my God, how does anybody handle these relationships? And I was in grad school at the time. I thought, you got Jesus, you got to be kidding me. Of all times to do this in grad school, the course, the relationship, all the work for the master's program. But that's what I needed. I guess I would say I was a repressed, denied, tough nut to crack. And Jesus said, no problem. I know the right formula for that. We'll get you cracked open here. And then there's a dismantling where that's why people turn to drugs and alcohol and sexuality and shopping and all kinds of things, because the dismantling is perceived by the ego as very painful and disillusioning. Feels like almost nearly a shattering, but it's really more of a dissolving and an unwinding. Mm-hmm. So I find that's why this is a beautiful topic, because I think once we bring it into the conscious conversation, which is what we're doing, what we do is then it's up into awareness, and then what seems to be just the playing out in conversations or relationships, suddenly it can have a deeper purpose. We can say, wait a minute here, I'm triggered here, but I'm not going to put the blame onto you or this or that or the society or other people. I need to face something in my mind, and I want to get the lesson. And I think that's the great value of it all.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that we're having this conversation, because the path, I've suffered a lot. That's just true. I went to hell with my addiction, and as a single mom of 3 kids, it's just been hard. And the truth is, like, we don't have to learn through pain. We can heal and learn through joy and through having fun. And what's so fascinating to me is that, and I can't think of a specific movie that, would be a good example for this, but we can watch a movie that the main characters are experiencing extreme hardship and extreme pain, and we can feel it with them, but we can also see it through to where the light enters. And we can do that process having some sort of knowing, right? That it's going to be a happy ending, or it's going to be okay. Because I think some of my favorite movies are ones that don't have happy endings
Yeah.
for the shift. But that's the example,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want a happy ending for my life, and I'm totally fine. In fact, not just fine, but experiencing joy as I'm watching movies that don't have happy endings.
Yeah.
Because it's not so personal. So we can actually expand our consciousness through joy and through having fun.
Yeah.
And when you were mentioning the numbness and the addiction, I remembered that when I first got sober, um, movies about addiction were so helpful to me. And the reason why is that a lot of addicts, we walk into, the rooms of AA, or we get started in our sobriety journey, and we actually believe that we're different. We believe we're terminally different, and that we're special, and that nobody knows anything about what we're going through. So they even tell us, listen for the similarities, not the differences. But it does take a while for us to train our minds to go to a meeting and to listen to the similarities. So for a long time, because I didn't have a DUI, because I was never arrested, because I was never homeless, because I didn't have these things that these people were speaking of in these meetings, I didn't identify. But when I watched movies about addiction and recovery, and they take you through the whole journey of, oh, this drug or this substance, and oh, life is so great, to the ick, to the unmanageable part, through the emotions, I could see, oh my God, I do have a problem.
Yeah.
And that was the opening for me to listen to the similarities in these meetings. Like I couldn't
Yeah.
have done, I can't say that, but it didn't happen for me in the meetings. It happened through watching movies like 28 Days, Train Spotting, like all these movies about addiction and recovery.
Yeah. It's beautiful that you have all that insight into that, because that allows you to be used in healing, the plan of healing, because you've touched upon it, you've seen it, you've been right in the middle of it, you've come through it, and are coming through it higher and higher. I have a friend of mine who I've worked with for some years, and he's got, like, I think I might have mentioned him to you. He's out west with us, in the Western United States, but he's got like 12 steps, Christian, Course in Miracles, and he uses a lot of movies as well. And he's taken a lot of the course and course lessons into prisons, and then he's befriended the wardens, the guards, the prisoners. They all, when he walks in, he's got long hair, he kind of looks like Jesus walking into the prison. They all love him, and then he gets the yes, yes, yes. So now he's using my movie watcher's guide, and prisoners are teaching the course to other prisoners in prison using the movies. It just, in 3 different prisons in the state of Ohio, it's happening. And
Yeah.
he's just this year, he's building a retreat center for all these different factions, prison ministries, 12 steps, Course in Miracles, and Christian quad ministry. So that's going to be fun. We might have fun joining maybe later in the year or next year when the retreat center is built. It's on 200 acres, but he's going to be taking people that are versed in what we're talking about, coming out of prison and launching to teach what they would learn in the world. That's rehabilitation. I
Yes.
think when you were talking too, I was like thinking it was like a walk down nostalgia lane for me, because I remember I watched a movie you probably have heard of with Meg Ryan and Andy Garcia, When a Man Loves a Woman. And she has the drinking issues seemingly, and he thinks he's the sober one. He's a pilot. And that's such a great movie, because as she goes through recovery, his anger comes up,
Yeah.
and it changes the dynamics of the whole self-concept, and starts to get at the people addiction that's mixed in there as well with the other things. It's kind of even deeper. And then there's more modern movies, like I think it's called Thank You for Sharing, with
Yeah.
Gwyneth Paltrow.
Mhm.
Uh, And that one is amazing too, because when I watch that, I see all these buddies, they're all calling each other to help work through the program, through the steps and through the healing, but they're calling each other. And I watch how everything is synchronized. The relationships are synchronized. When somebody's going down, somebody comes in. And then it turns around in another scene. When the other's going down, one comes in. You can really kind of see it in action in these movies because it's right on the big screen. And, and that's something I think that it's a huge gift for everyone. So if anyone's kind of feeling alone, like they're weighted down dealing with it all on their own, you can watch a few of these movies and get lifted up.
Yeah. There's so much I want to say about this. So first, there's a ton of movies that I watched that, what I got was that like it zooms you out and you can see a little bit more about how it all works, because when you're in it through your level of consciousness, it can be so difficult to take the next step forward. So if you have a little bit of a perspective, it can be easier. At least that was my experience. But I just want to say something about that movie, When a Man Loves a Woman. So when I was in college, I competed in platform speaking and prose. And the monologue that I did, which I won first place, was from When a Man Loves a Woman, when she's at her meeting. And I'm getting chills, like, and she's speaking. And this was before I even took my first drink. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't start drinking until I was 19, and this was probably right before that. So kind of synchronistic there, but that was the first movie I went to when I got sober, was When a Man Loves a Woman. And she was a mom, and, a lot of the things in her life had not happened to me. But that didn't matter because I could feel her and her despair. And I probably watch that movie now like once every couple of years. I think it was once a year at first, but yeah, I love that you brought that in. I started getting chills. There are so many. Thank you for sharing. I love that one. It really highlights other addictions as well.
Yeah.
Euphoria is a show. It's a series on HBO. There's one about a supermodel named Gia. There's so many like movies out there that I know are written by people who recovered. Like that's the only way that it can be portrayed that way, is from someone who knows. And I think that's what I love is I feel truth. And so when I'm watching a movie, whether it's about addiction or another issue or just the truths of the universe, when I feel it, I'm just like, they know.
Yeah.
Whoever did this knows this was a message for the world.
Yeah, it's so good. There's a part in the Course in Miracles where Jesus says, if you'll be a miracle worker for me, I will orchestrate time and space for you. And that's a pretty expansive idea. Most of us did not growing up thinking that, anything could orchestrate time and space. It just seemed like it was happening to us, not that there was a big grand plan underneath it, and that everything was working together for good. But our conversation is really getting at that's the power of the spirit. Because if you watch When a Man Loves a Woman before you go through all these experiences, like you're getting they talk about preventative medicine, you're getting a seed planted in your mind. And it even comes through your speech and your prose and poetry. And then you've got something in your toolbox, a mental toolbox in your heart to deal with that. And for some people, it's the other way around, where they go through it and they can't make any sense of it. Like I was contacted by a man in prison. He was in prison for murdering a man, and he was a professional boxer. And he was even on ESPN, a very popular boxer who murdered a man, was in prison, started to get into my teachings and the course, and went from shame and guilt and we'll just say many years, I don't know, it's maybe 20 some years in prison. And he just started to light up like a Christmas tree when he started to realize that the guilt was not coming from God. It was coming from his mind and the ego. And he became so excited that he's one of the ones that's he's teaching using the Movie Watcher's Guide to Enlightenment in prison. And I think his release date has now been set for 2025, for next July. I did a session online and I'm communicating with him. He's writing me handwritten letters with little red pens, and I'm reading them and I'm like, whoa, this guy is really going for it. You know, he's in for murder, but he's in for healing. Like, he's really going for it. He's a captive audience for Jesus. And so what happened was I did a show, an online show, and I mentioned him and I took the letter out and I read it. I went line by line and I was even crying while I was reading it. The people in the audience were so touched. I think it's still on YouTube. I think it's called Escape to Freedom or something like that. People were crying in the Zoom room, in the studio where I was, everyone was crying. So then after that was on and it aired, then people started writing in. I need to have his address. I want to write him. People started pouring their hearts out to him in prison. He's in prison for murder, and people just flood him with mail of, I totally relate to you. I'm with you. Here's a book of stamps, and here's envelopes to please be my pen pal. And then eventually he turned out being a teacher for some that were outside of the prison. He's teaching from inside. So, this is an example about how when we give our heart over to healing, it just kind of, the Spirit takes it and really runs with it, if we're willing, if we're sincere. And I think that's the great joy of life, is just seeing that in the movies, in the music, in prison, everywhere.
Right. I love that story. Thank you so much. I'll go find it, or you can send it to me and I'll include it in the description of this show, because that sounds like something I definitely want to tune into. And it's so interesting in my reading of A Course in Miracles this morning. They and I'm starting it over. I got a new book from one of my new friends who's also a Course in Miracles teacher, and it's sparkly and it says Jesus on it. So I was like, well, I'm just going to start reading it over. So I think I'm in section 2 or 3. And, I can't remember one single sentence, but it was about guilt. And as we realize that guilt is how the ego traps us, or the belief that we're guilty, once we let go of that, then we're truly free. And that really struck me. And especially when you were talking about this man in prison, because as an addict, I could only imagine. I mean, you're literally in prison because a bunch of people decided you were guilty, or you said, yeah, I'm guilty, right? We use that wording too. Yeah. And so I couldn't even imagine on that level, but healing from the guilt that I had for everything I did or that I didn't even know I did, because sometimes I would black out. So maybe that was a gift. I don't know. But the guilt, it's so heavy. And you mentioned the word earlier, rehabilitation. And this has nothing to do with movies. I just love how there are many, many souls now who are working to truly rehabilitate people, and not just put them in prison or label them as, an alcoholic addict and say they have no hope. Because what it does for me is it shows what Jesus is saying in the Course is true. We can be forgiven. We are forgiven.
Yeah, we are forgiven. Yeah. It's like rehabilitation, because, a lot of people grew up thinking of the crucifixion as an event that happened 2,000 years ago. But in the Course, Jesus is saying, no, you keep acting and reacting and thinking and believing and crucifying yourself, which puts it more to a belief system and a choice, like a wrong-minded choice, instead of an event from 2,000 years ago. And then right-mindedness would be rehabilitation, restoration, healing. And that also is a choice. So it's like learning to really choose the Holy Spirit's thought system and Jesus's thought system. And what better use of time is there than that? I mean, what else would you want to pour all your energy into? If any efforts required, that's worth it for me. Resurrection, rehabilitation, happiness, joy, restoration, that's all the same, different words for the same experience.
Yeah.
So it's exciting that we can really go for that now, and we just feel the blessings all around us. We received gifts. You got a gift of the sparkly edition. There's so many things that just sprinkle down like lemon drops on top of us when we're really ready. It just starts rolling in.
Yeah. And it's effortless. It's effortless too. And so many, synchronicities to look back on. I mean, even just this When a Man Loves a Woman, I hadn't even thought about that movie for a while. And when you mentioned it, I was like, wow, that to me is a sprinkling of, yes, like, yes, this is the, right place to be right now. Those synchronicities are so amazing. And yeah, so I know we've been talking for a while, and so we might have to do this again. I'm sure we will, because I think you're one of my favorite guests and favorite people to talk about Jesus with, A Course in Miracles, or just life in general. So I do have a few questions that I ask all my guests, and I know I've asked you them probably several times. So I'm going to be a little bit different, and I'm going to actually start with a question that I don't ask anybody. And that question is, if you were to give us 3 movies to watch, what would those top 3 movies be?
Well, let's see. I think Matrix, and let's go with let's see, Bruce Almighty's fun.
That's one that my kids always, Bruce Almighty and Evan Almighty are
Evan
the
Almighty.
we watch with my
those
kids.
are classics.
Yeah.
Everything. Let's see, what could be a little more intense movie that would be really fun to watch? Came out around the same time as The Matrix. It's called The 13th Floor, which is a kind of a murder mystery, but it goes and shows that everything and everyone is part of a projection. And it actually has a projection scene where he kind of thinks he's going to the end of the world. I think out in Arizona, where you are, I believe he's out, and he drives into the desert, and he sees these green stripes like the Matrix, like he reaches the edge of it. So maybe that's just off the top of my head now. Maybe that one people haven't heard of, 13th Floor. That's a pretty intense one, but whoa, woo, woo, woo. When you want to take a ride and loosen from the belief in the world, that's a good one.
All right, I'm putting that on my list along with Dark City and Solaris for the weekend. I don't know if my kids will sign off on those, but they'll be on my list to watch. David, is there anything else that you want to share before I go into the questions that I ask all my guests?
Well, I do. I just finished putting out a book called Jesus, the Gospel of Love. And I've done so many books with A Course in Miracles that I actually thought I would put out a book where there's questions, and then I use scripture from the Bible, and I do sharings of intuitively, right, what it means, giving the high interpretation. So it's more for maybe Christians that have they've left the church, or they're disgruntled with the way Christianity is today, but they're Jesus lovers. They love Jesus, and I do talk a bit about the ego in there, even though I don't bring in the Course references, because sometimes Christians, hear from the pulpit that the Course in Miracles is the work of the devil and those kind of things. So it's a nice book. It's my latest gift. So if you know any Christian friends and you think they might like to, they're looking for a deep journey with the love of Jesus, that's a good one.
Yeah. Awesome. I'll be sure to include the link to that in the show notes. And also, I have done quite a few interviews with the deconstruction community. So I think that might
Okay.
be an amazing place
Yeah, to
to
share that. Yeah,
introduce that
yeah.
book. Awesome. David, thank you so much. The first question that I ask all my guests is, how would you define God or source?
Well, I always talk. I think that God is the one thing for me that's undefinable, because everything in this world of belief and concepts is a way to put a circle or a definition around something. And to me, Buddha and Lao Tzu and all the great mystics and saints have said, empty your mind. And the Course says that too. Simply do this, be still, and lay aside all thoughts. So to me, I'm going for answer no definition. And that is a little scary for people, but for me, that's I feel happiest when I can't define it, God.
Thank you. The next question is, what would you say is the purpose of life?
I think the purpose is to forgive, and what that would mean would be to see the world differently, see it from a unified perception and a holistic perception where everything and everyone is included in that in a loving way. So then it's like reflecting the love of our heart and the love of our mind.
Awesome. And the final question is, if you could take one piece of wisdom that you have now and offer that piece of wisdom to a younger version of yourself, what would that one piece of wisdom be?
It would be gentle with yourself, be patient. It's all going to work out, and you're going to feel so grateful when you open your heart up. So keep opening your heart, trusting.
And how do people get in touch with you?
Well, I think just as a website, davidhoffmeister.com is a good starting point, because it's just kind of an introduction to things, and then they can go on YouTube. Like, there's a lot of people like to watch videos or audios on SoundCloud or some different platforms, Spotify, Apple. So yeah, that's the best way. Just Google my name, and then these things come up.
Yes. Yeah. So that's where you get started, davidhoffmeister.com. I'll include that in the description of the show, as well as information to your movie watcher's guide to enlightenment, the book, the community, the website, all of that, so that anyone who is inspired by today can take a look and join. So David, again, this has been so much fun. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today,
Thank you.
for following your passions, for listening to Jesus and following his direction, and sharing all the gifts that he shares with you.
Thank you, Christine. It's always a joy. So always look forward to coming on your Conscious Conversations, the show podcast. It's a thrill.
Well, I know I'll see you again. So stay tuned, everyone. David will be back. I would like to personally thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that you never miss a beat. And if you really resonated with this content, please share it with all of your friends so that collectively we can expand our consciousness. Have a very blessed week.